Picture this. It's the happiest day of your life. You're wearing your dream wedding dress, surrounded by everyone you love, promising forever to the person you trust most in the world. But what if that same person, just hours later, throws you out of a moving car at 40 miles per hour? What if the man who just vowed to protect you becomes the one who nearly kills you? This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Sarah Mitchell, a 26-year-old elementary school teacher from Springfield, Illinois, whose wedding night became a nightmare that would change her life forever. And the secret her new husband was hiding will leave you questioning everything you think you know about the people closest to you. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The date was September 15, 2018. Sarah Elizabeth Reynolds was about to become Sarah Mitchell, marrying her college sweetheart Michael David Mitchell in what everyone described as a fairytale wedding. The ceremony took place at the historic Oakwood Gardens in Springfield, with white roses climbing the chapel walls and golden September sunlight filtering through stained glass windows. Sarah had dreamed of this day since she was a little girl. Her grandmother's antique lace veil cascaded down her shoulders as she walked down the aisle, her face glowing with pure joy. Michael stood at the altar in his navy blue suit, his blonde hair perfectly styled, the charming smile that had first caught Sarah's attention during their sophomore year at Eastern Illinois University spread across his face. To everyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple. Sarah, with her warm brown eyes and infectious laugh, had always been the type of person who lit up every room she entered. She taught second grade at Lincoln Elementary, where parents specifically requested their children be placed in her class. Michael worked as a financial advisor at Springfield Trust Bank, where his colleagues knew him as ambitious, well-dressed, and always ready with a joke. They had dated for 4 years, lived together for 2, and seemed to have everything figured out. Their friends often joked that they were relationship goals, the couple everyone else wanted to be. The wedding reception was everything Sarah had imagined. Her father gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about how proud he was of his daughter and how Michael had become the son he'd always wanted. Sarah's best friend Emma served as maid of honor and shared stories of how Sarah had planned every detail of this wedding since they were in high school. The couple's first dance was to At Last by Etta James, and as they swayed together under twinkling lights, guests whispered about how in love they looked. Michael's groomsmen raised their glasses in toast after toast, praising their friend's choice in a bride and predicting decades of happiness ahead. But if you had looked closely that night, you might have noticed something that several guests mentioned later. During the reception, Michael disappeared for nearly 30 minutes. When his cousin Jake asked where he'd been, Michael claimed he was making an important phone call about work. Jake thought it was strange for someone to be handling business on their wedding night, but he shrugged it off. Sarah's sister Jennifer noticed that every time someone mentioned how perfect they were together, Michael's smile seemed to tighten just slightly. And the bartender later told police that Michael had ordered 4 double whiskeys in the span of an hour, which was unusual for someone who was normally a light drinker. As the evening wound down around 11 p.m., Sarah was exhausted but radiantly happy. She had changed out of her wedding gown into a flowing white sundress for easier movement, but kept her grandmother's pearl earrings and the delicate silver bracelet Michael had given her as a wedding gift that morning. The plan was simple. Michael would drive them to the Marriott downtown where they had booked the honeymoon suite, complete with champagne, rose petals, and a view of the Springfield skyline. They would spend 3 days there before flying to Hawaii for their 2-week honeymoon. Sarah hugged her parents goodbye, promising to call them the next day. Her mother Patricia whispered in her ear, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You deserve all the happiness in the world." Her father Robert shook Michael's hand firmly and said, "You take care of my little girl." Michael nodded solemnly and replied, "I promise, sir. I'll protect her with my life." Those words would haunt Robert Mitchell for years to come. As the newlyweds walked to Michael's black Honda Civic, decorated with tin cans and a just married banner that Sarah's younger brother had playfully attached, guests threw rice and called out final congratulations. Sarah waved from the passenger seat, her wedding ring catching the streetlight as she blew kisses to her family and friends. No one watching that perfect send-off could have imagined what would happen in the next 27 minutes. The first few minutes of the drive were normal. Sarah was chattering excitedly about the wedding, replaying her favorite moments. She talked about how beautiful her cousin's dress was, how funny her uncle's speech had been, and how she couldn't wait to see the professional photos. Michael was quiet, which Sarah initially attributed to exhaustion. After all, it had been a long day, and he'd been up since 5 a.m. getting ready with his groomsmen. But as they drove through downtown Springfield, past the familiar streets where they'd had their first date at Milano's restaurant, where Michael had first told her he loved her outside the old movie theater, something in the car's atmosphere began to shift. Michael's hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His jaw was clenched, and he was staring straight ahead with an intensity that made Sarah uncomfortable. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked, reaching over to touch his arm. Michael jerked away from her touch as if she'd burned him. "Don't touch me," he snapped, his voice carrying a harshness Sarah had never heard before. The Sarah who had been laughing just moments before fell silent, confusion and hurt washing over her face. They had been driving for about 10 minutes when Michael suddenly pulled off the main road onto Route 36, a less traveled highway that led away from downtown Springfield and toward the rural areas outside the city. Sarah's stomach began to knot with worry. "Michael, where are we going?" "The hotel is back that way." She pointed in the direction they had come from, her voice taking on a nervous edge. Michael didn't answer. Instead, he pressed harder on the accelerator. The speedometer climbed from 35 to 50, then to 60 miles per hour. Sarah noticed his breathing had become rapid and shallow. Something was terribly wrong, but she couldn't understand what had triggered this sudden change in the man she thought she knew better than anyone in the world. "Michael, you're scaring me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please tell me what's wrong. Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." Michael's response was to laugh, but it wasn't the warm, familiar laugh Sarah had fallen in love with. This was something cold and bitter. "Together," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "There is no together, Sarah. There never was." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at her husband of less than 4 hours, trying to process what he was saying. Then Michael began to speak, and the words that came out of his mouth shattered everything Sarah thought she knew about her life. "Did you really think I didn't know?" he asked, his voice growing louder with each word. "Did you think I was stupid? That I wouldn't find out about your little secret?" Sarah's mind raced, trying to understand what he was talking about. "What secret?" "Michael, I don't know what you mean." But Michael wasn't listening. He had reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up so Sarah could see the screen while still keeping one hand on the wheel. On the display was a text message conversation, and Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized her own phone number. But these weren't messages she had sent. Someone had been texting Michael from her phone, messages that suggested she had been having an affair with David Connors, a fellow teacher at her school. Messages that talked about how she was only marrying Michael for his money, how she couldn't wait for the wedding to be over so she could be with her real love. Messages that were detailed, intimate, and absolutely devastating. And they were complete fabrications. Sarah had never sent these messages. She had never had an affair with David Connors, who was happily married with 3 children and barely knew Sarah beyond their professional interactions. "Michael, those messages. I didn't send those. I swear on my mother's life, I never sent those messages. Someone else had to have my phone, or someone is setting me up." Sarah's voice was desperate now, tears streaming down her face as she realized the trap that had been laid for her. But Michael was beyond reasoning. The alcohol he had consumed at the reception, combined with the rage that had been building inside him as he stared at these fake messages throughout the evening, had created a perfect storm of fury. "Stop lying to me," he screamed, slamming his hand against the dashboard. "I have proof right here. You've been playing me for a fool this entire time." Sarah tried to grab his phone to look more closely at the messages, to find some way to prove they were fake, but Michael yanked it away from her. In that moment, she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood freeze. The timestamp on the messages showed they had been sent during the wedding reception itself, at times when Sarah's phone had been locked in her purse in the bridal suite, where she had been surrounded by bridesmaids the entire time. There was no way she could have sent those messages even if she had wanted to. But before Sarah could point this out, Michael made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He looked at his new wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish just hours before, and his face twisted into an expression of pure hatred. "Get out," he said simply. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Michael, we're in the middle of nowhere. It's almost midnight. Please, just let me explain. Get out. Michael screamed, and then he did something that Sarah's mind struggled to process. While driving at 45 miles per hour on a dark country highway, he reached across the car, unlocked her door, and pushed her toward it. Sarah grabbed the door frame, fighting to stay inside the car, but Michael was stronger. He shoved her harder, and the combination of his force and the car's momentum sent Sarah tumbling out onto the asphalt. The last thing she remembered before hitting the road was the sound of Michael's voice yelling after her, "That's what lying whores get." Then everything went black. Sarah Mitchell lay unconscious on Route 36 for 11 minutes before a passing motorist found her. Jake Williams, a 28-year-old construction worker heading home from his own late shift, initially thought he had come across a car accident. His headlights illuminated what looked like a bundle of white fabric on the side of the road, and as he got closer, his heart stopped as he realized it was a young woman in a wedding dress. Sarah was lying face down on the shoulder, her white sundress torn and stained with blood, road rash covering her arms and legs. Jake immediately called 911 while carefully checking for signs of life. Sarah was breathing, but she was unconscious and clearly severely injured. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, and paramedics later said that Sarah was lucky Jake had found her when he did. The rural stretch of highway rarely saw traffic after midnight, and she could have lain there for hours in the September chill. At Springfield Memorial Hospital, doctors treated Sarah for a severe concussion, multiple contusions, road rash over 30% of her body, and a fractured collarbone. But the physical injuries, while serious, would heal. The psychological trauma was just beginning. When Sarah regained consciousness 6 hours later, the first person she saw was her sister Jennifer, who had been called by the hospital. Jennifer's face was streaked with tears, and her voice shook as she asked, "Sarah, what happened? Where's Michael?" The memories came flooding back to Sarah in fragments. The text messages, Michael's rage, the feeling of being pushed from the moving car. But even as she tried to explain what had happened, a part of her struggled to believe it herself. How could the man she had loved for 4 years, the man she had just married, have done something so horrific? Jennifer called their parents and the police, and soon Sarah's hospital room was filled with detectives asking questions she was still trying to answer for herself. When Detective Maria Santos asked Sarah if she had any idea who might have sent the fake text messages, Sarah's mind immediately went to one person, Rebecca Morgan, Michael's ex-girlfriend from high school. Rebecca had never gotten over Michael, and had made several attempts to contact him throughout their relationship. She had even shown up at their engagement party uninvited, claiming she just wanted to congratulate them while making subtle digs at Sarah throughout the evening. Meanwhile, Michael had driven straight home after pushing Sarah from the car, and he was found there by police at 6 a.m., passed out on his couch with the wedding decorations still hanging on the walls. When officers woke him up and told him his wife was in the hospital, Michael claimed that Sarah had jumped from the car during an argument. "She said she made a mistake marrying me," Michael told Detective Santos. "She opened the door and jumped out. I tried to stop her, but she was determined to hurt herself." It was a story that might have been believable if not for the evidence that contradicted it. Jake Williams had provided a detailed statement about the condition in which he found Sarah, and her injuries were inconsistent with someone who had jumped from a car. The road rash patterns and the location where she was found suggested she had been pushed from the passenger side while the vehicle was moving at considerable speed. More importantly, cell phone records revealed the truth about those text messages. They hadn't been sent from Sarah's phone at all, but from a spoof number designed to look like Sarah's. The person behind this elaborate scheme had used readily available technology to create fake messages that would drive Michael into a jealous rage on his wedding night. The investigation took an unexpected turn when police traced the spoofed messages to a computer at the Springfield Public Library. Security footage from the library showed Rebecca Morgan using a public computer on 3 separate occasions in the 2 weeks leading up to the wedding, staying for hours at a time and accessing websites that taught users how to create fake text messages. Rebecca had methodically planned to destroy Sarah and Michael's marriage, but she hadn't counted on Michael's reaction being so violent. When confronted by police, Rebecca initially denied any involvement, but faced with overwhelming evidence, she eventually confessed. Her motive was exactly what Sarah had suspected. She couldn't bear the thought of Michael being happy with someone else. "I just wanted him to see that she wasn't perfect," Rebecca told detectives through tears. "I thought if he knew she was cheating, he would leave her and come back to me. I never thought he would hurt her." Rebecca Morgan was charged with identity theft, harassment, and conspiracy to commit assault. But the legal consequences of her actions paled in comparison to the destruction she had caused. Michael Mitchell was arrested and charged with aggravated battery, reckless endangerment, and domestic violence. During his trial, his defense attorney argued that Michael had been the victim of an elaborate psychological manipulation, and that his actions, while inexcusable, were the result of extreme emotional distress caused by Rebecca's deception. Character witnesses testified that Michael had never shown any signs of violence before that night, and that he had always been loving and protective toward Sarah. Michael himself took the stand and broke down as he described his state of mind on their wedding night. "I loved Sarah more than anything in the world," he said, his voice barely audible. "When I saw those messages, it felt like my entire world had collapsed. I know there's no excuse for what I did, but I wasn't thinking clearly. The alcohol, the shock, the betrayal I thought I was feeling, it all combined into this rage that I couldn't control." Sarah attended every day of the trial, still wearing her wedding ring, still struggling to reconcile the man who had gently held her hand during their vows with the person who had thrown her from a moving car hours later. The trial revealed disturbing details about the psychological manipulation that had led to that terrible night. Rebecca had been obsessively monitoring Michael and Sarah's relationship for years, collecting information about their schedules, their friends, and their habits. She had created multiple fake social media accounts to keep tabs on them, and had even befriended some of Sarah's co-workers to gather intimate details about her life. The fake text messages had been carefully crafted to include specific details that only someone close to Sarah would know, making them seem authentic to Michael in his intoxicated and emotional state. Mental health experts testified about the powerful effects of what they called intimate terrorism, the systematic psychological manipulation designed to destroy trust and relationships. Dr. Patricia Hayes, a forensic psychologist, explained to the jury how Rebecca's scheme had been designed to target Michael's deepest insecurities and fears. "This wasn't a simple prank or moment of jealousy," Dr. Hayes testified. "This was a calculated campaign of emotional warfare designed to cause maximum psychological damage." The jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Michael guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, though he would be eligible for parole after serving 4 years with good behavior. Rebecca Morgan received a sentence of 3 years, with the possibility of early release after 18 months. As the verdicts were read, Sarah sat in the courtroom surrounded by her family, feeling a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and emptiness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo the trauma of that night or repair the trust that had been shattered. The fairy-tale marriage that had begun with such hope and joy was officially over. Sarah filed for divorce while Michael was serving his sentence, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional trauma. She kept his last name, not out of any remaining affection, but because she had already begun the difficult process of rebuilding her identity and didn't want to deal with the administrative hassle of changing it back. The road to recovery was long and difficult for Sarah. She took a leave of absence from her teaching position and spent 6 months in intensive therapy, working to process the trauma of what she had experienced. The physical injuries healed relatively quickly, but the emotional scars ran much deeper. She struggled with trust issues, anxiety, and depression. Simple things that she had once taken for granted, like getting in a car or going on a date, became sources of overwhelming fear. Her family rallied around her, but Sarah often felt isolated and misunderstood. How do you explain to someone that your husband tried to kill you on your wedding night because of fake text messages? How do you make sense of such a senseless act of violence? Sarah's therapist, Dr. Rachel Coleman, helped her understand that she was not responsible for Michael's actions, no matter how convincing the fake evidence had seemed to him. "You were the victim of 2 separate but related crimes," Dr. Coleman told her. "Rebecca's psychological manipulation and Michael's physical violence. Neither was your fault, and both caused you significant trauma that will take time to heal." Slowly, with the support of her family, friends, and professional counselors, Sarah began to rebuild her life. She returned to teaching after a year, finding solace in the innocence and joy of her second-grade students. Children, she discovered, had an incredible ability to focus on the present moment and find happiness in simple things, lessons that Sarah desperately needed to learn. She also became involved with a local domestic violence support group, where she met other women who had experienced intimate partner violence. Sharing her story with other survivors helped Sarah feel less alone and gave her a sense of purpose in her healing journey. I realized that my experience, as terrible as it was, might help other women recognize the warning signs or feel less alone in their own recovery, Sarah explained to a reporter 2 years after the incident. She began speaking at domestic violence awareness events, telling her story not for sympathy, but to educate others about the complex factors that can lead to intimate partner violence. 3 years after that terrible wedding night, Sarah met David Chen, a counselor who worked with at-risk youth in Springfield. Their relationship developed slowly and carefully, built on a foundation of mutual respect, open communication, and patience. David understood Sarah's trauma and never pushed her to move faster than she was comfortable with. Their first date was a simple coffee meeting at a cafe Sarah had chosen because it was brightly lit and always busy, spaces where she felt safe. It took months before Sarah felt comfortable being alone with David, and even longer before she could think about physical intimacy without experiencing panic attacks. But David was patient and understanding, recognizing that Sarah's healing couldn't be rushed. When they did eventually marry in a small ceremony 2 years later, it was a celebration of Sarah's strength and resilience as much as their love for each other. The wedding was deliberately small and informal, just immediate family and a few close friends gathered in Sarah's parents' backyard. Sarah wore a simple blue dress instead of white, and they wrote their own vows that focused on partnership, respect, and communication rather than traditional promises of obedience and devotion. Michael Mitchell was released from prison after serving 4.5 years of his sentence. He had participated in anger management programs and domestic violence intervention classes while incarcerated, and by all accounts had been a model prisoner. Upon his release, he wrote a letter to Sarah, which was delivered through their attorneys, respecting Sarah's wish for no direct contact, in which he apologized for his actions and expressed genuine remorse for the pain he had caused. "I know that no apology can undo what I did," Michael wrote. "I have spent every day for the past 4 years trying to understand how I could have hurt the person I claimed to love most in the world. I was manipulated, but that doesn't excuse my actions. I made the choice to believe the worst about you instead of trusting our relationship, and then I made the choice to hurt you physically. Those were my choices, and I take full responsibility for them." Michael moved to another state after his release and began working with a construction company owned by a family friend. He also volunteered with organizations that helped formerly incarcerated individuals reintegrate into society, particularly focusing on men who had committed domestic violence offenses. Rebecca Morgan served 18 months in prison and was released on probation. She was required to complete community service and attend psychological counseling as part of her sentence. Like Michael, she wrote a letter of apology to Sarah, though hers focused more on the unintended consequences of her actions rather than taking full responsibility for the deliberate nature of her scheme. "I never wanted you to get hurt," Rebecca wrote. "I was just jealous and wanted Michael back. I thought if he knew you weren't perfect, he would choose me instead. I never imagined he would react violently." Sarah never responded to either letter, feeling that she had nothing to gain from further communication with either of them. Her focus was on her future, not on relitigating the past. However, she did keep both letters, viewing them as important documents in her healing process and as potential evidence if either Michael or Rebecca ever violated the restraining orders that had been issued against them. The case drew significant media attention, particularly from domestic violence advocates who used it to illustrate the complex factors that can contribute to intimate partner violence. Sarah's story became part of training materials for police officers, social workers, and medical professionals who work with domestic violence victims. Her case highlighted several important points that are often overlooked in discussions of domestic violence. First, it demonstrated how quickly a situation can escalate from psychological manipulation to life-threatening physical violence. Second, it showed how external factors, in this case, Rebecca's elaborate deception, can trigger violent behavior in individuals who may not have obvious risk factors for domestic violence. Finally, it illustrated the importance of believing victims and conducting thorough investigations rather than accepting perpetrators' initial explanations of events. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a researcher who studies domestic violence at the University of Illinois, used Sarah's case as part of a larger study on the role of third-party manipulation in intimate partner violence. What makes this case particularly interesting from a research perspective, Dr. Walsh explained, is how it demonstrates the vulnerability of even seemingly healthy relationships to outside interference. Michael and Sarah had been together for 4 years with no documented history of violence or abuse, yet a carefully orchestrated campaign of deception was able to trigger a near-fatal assault within hours. Dr. Walsh's research found that cases involving third-party manipulation often resulted in more severe violence than those arising from relationship conflicts between partners alone, possibly because the manipulated partner feels betrayed not just by their romantic partner but by their entire understanding of reality. 10 years after that devastating wedding night, Sarah Mitchell-Chen, she had hyphenated her last name after remarrying, was thriving. She had been promoted to vice principal at Lincoln Elementary School and was pursuing a master's degree in educational leadership. She and David had 2 children together, a 6-year-old daughter named Grace and a 4-year-old son named James. Sarah still attended therapy periodically, particularly during stressful times or anniversary dates, but she had largely overcome the acute trauma symptoms that had dominated her life in the years immediately following the assault. She had also become a sought-after speaker at conferences on domestic violence, trauma recovery, and the intersection of technology and abuse. Her presentations often focused on the importance of digital literacy in recognizing and preventing technologically facilitated abuse, and she worked with several organizations to develop educational materials for young people about healthy relationships and the dangers of online manipulation. Sarah's parents, Robert and Patricia Reynolds, had also become advocates for domestic violence survivors, particularly through their church and community organizations. They established a small foundation that provided emergency financial assistance to domestic violence victims who were leaving abusive relationships, understanding from their daughter's experience how important practical support could be during the initial crisis period. "We couldn't protect Sarah from what happened to her," Patricia Reynolds explained to a local newspaper reporter. "But we can try to help other families who are going through similar experiences." The foundation had helped over 200 families in its 8 years of operation, providing everything from security deposits for new apartments to childcare assistance for women attending court proceedings. Michael Mitchell, now in his late 30s, had rebuilt his life as well, though his path had been more difficult due to his criminal record and the public nature of his crime. He worked as a supervisor for a construction company in Colorado and had been in a stable relationship for 3 years with a woman named Amanda, who knew about his past and had insisted he continue with counseling as a condition of their relationship. Michael had never remarried and said in a rare interview that he didn't feel he deserved a second chance at marriage after what he had done to Sarah. He continued to volunteer with organizations that worked with formerly incarcerated individuals and had become particularly focused on programs that addressed domestic violence prevention. "I can't undo what I did," Michael said in the interview. "But I can try to make sure other men don't make the same terrible choices I made. I want other people to learn from my mistakes so they don't destroy lives the way I destroyed Sarah's life and my own." Rebecca Morgan had largely disappeared from public view after her release from prison. She had moved to another state and changed her name, making it difficult to track her activities or determine what lessons, if any, she had learned from the consequences of her actions. Some advocates criticized the relatively light sentence she had received, arguing that her systematic campaign of psychological manipulation deserved more serious consequences. "Rebecca Morgan was the architect of this entire tragedy," said Maria Santos, the detective who had investigated the case and had since become a domestic violence prevention specialist. "Without her deliberate deception, Sarah would never have been hurt. Yet she served less time than Michael, even though her actions were more premeditated and calculating." The disparity in their sentences reflected ongoing challenges in the legal system's ability to adequately address psychological abuse and technological manipulation, particularly when they don't result in direct physical harm to the perpetrator's primary victim. The case also had lasting impacts on digital privacy and security awareness in the Springfield area. Local law enforcement began providing more education to community members about technology-facilitated abuse, including how to recognize fake messages and protect personal information online. Sarah's story was included in digital citizenship curricula at local high schools, helping teenagers understand how technology could be used to manipulate and harm others. The Springfield Police Department also updated their training protocols for domestic violence cases to include more thorough investigation of potential third-party involvement and technological evidence. As we reach the end of Sarah's story, it's important to reflect on what we can learn from this tragedy. Sarah's experience reminds us that domestic violence can affect anyone, regardless of education, social status, or the apparent health of their relationship. It shows us how quickly love can turn to violence when trust is destroyed and emotions are heightened by alcohol and manipulation. But perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates the incredible strength of the human spirit and the possibility of healing and growth even after the most traumatic experiences. Sarah didn't just survive what happened to her. She used her experience to help others and to build a new life filled with love, purpose, and meaning. How does Sarah's story make you feel? Can you imagine being in her position, thrown from a moving car by the person who had just promised to love and protect you forever? What would you have done if you were Sarah's family or friends during her recovery? And how do you think we as a society can better protect people from the kind of technological manipulation that Rebecca used to destroy Sarah and Michael's marriage? These are difficult questions without easy answers, but they're conversations we need to have if we want to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Sarah's story is ultimately one of survival, resilience, and hope, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the capacity to heal, to grow, and to help others who are walking similar paths. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine.